anticipate anyone else is going to be joining us here today from the ownership side on item number 2? Okay, all right. I think we're ready to go, Chair. Mr. Chair, anyone else is going to be joining us here today?
Sorry, David, what was that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think we're ready to begin whenever you're ready.
Okay. Let's get going. Good afternoon. My name is Tim Voss, and I'm the chair of the Historic Conservation Board. I'd like to take a minute to remind everyone about the rules of this proceeding. This proceeding is at all times governed by the rules of procedure, a copy of which is available online. All those planning to testify today, which does not include those solely making arguments such as attorneys, will be asked to take an oath administered by the board's attorney when they testify. This is a quasi-judicial hearing, and as such, the board reserves the right to deliberate in private. The Ohio rules of evidence do not apply to this hearing. However, professional rules of conduct do apply, and candor to the tribunal is required. The board members are citizen volunteers and are not paid for their service. They are treated as public officials under Ohio law, and any attempt to influence them, including but not limited to bribery, intimidation, retaliation, which may include contacting their employer in an attempt to exert influence, is punishable as a crime. All should be aware that this meeting is being tape recorded. Therefore, please speak clearly into your microphone, state your name and address for the record. In the event of any technical difficulties with the video conferencing technology, I may continue or postpone this hearing at my discretion. All participants providing testimony must have both camera and audio features turned on in order to participate. All right, Cassandra, do we have anybody on item number 1?
The only participants that are present are the applicant and the owner. I didn't have any other correspondence for participation.
All right. Item number 1 is on the consent docket. Does any board member wish to remove it from the consent docket and put it to the discussion docket? Hearing no such request, I will entertain a motion on 548 East 13th Street.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve both the zoning relief variances and the certificate of appropriateness as laid out by staff.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Mr. Sunderman?
Aye.
Mr. Zelasco?
Aye.
Ms. McKenzie?
Aye.
Mr. Weiss? Mr. Weiss? Ms. Smith-Dobbins?
Yes.
The chair votes aye. 548 East 13th Street is approved as laid out by staff. That brings us to item number 2, which is a quasi-legislative item. Ms. Ahaus, are you going to be presenting to us?
Yes, I'll be presenting.
All right. Would you go ahead and tell us what we're dealing with?
And you can see my screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. So the item before you is the local historic landmark designation for the property at 15 West 6th Street, known as the Terrace Plaza Hotel. The landmark designation is for the entire property within the boundaries shown on this map. It includes multiple parcels which have previously been divided into air lots. And a little bit of background on the designation. This property was previously listed in the National Register of Historic Places in August of 2017 under Criterion C, and that's as a building that embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or that represents the work of a master, or that possesses high artistic values, or that represents a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. A previous local landmark designation application was brought before the Historic Conservation Board by Councilmember David Mann. This was reviewed and it was recommended for approval for designation by the Historic Conservation Board on February 25th, 2019. That vote was 5-1 to recommend approval. At the request of the applicant at that time, the application was held and it did not proceed through the next two steps in the city's process. And that is review by City Planning Commission and City Council. So when Councilmember Mann's term ended in December of 2021, that previous application was sunset. The current applicant is the Cincinnati Preservation Association. And just to note, they do have standing to apply under 1435-07-2A of the zoning code as a local community organization, including but not limited to preservation associations and community councils. The zoning code does not require property owner consent for historic designation. The designation report and the guidelines that were submitted by Cincinnati Preservation Association for this review are the same submissions that were received and recommended for approval in February of 2019. So some background on the building. I know the applicant will probably present more of the specific history. It's an international style mixed use skyscraper. It was designed from 1945 to 1946 and completed in 1948. It was designed by the firm of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, known as SOM. The developer was John J. Emery Jr. He's a member of the Emery family who built many other important Cincinnati buildings, including the Crew Tower. It has a unique massing, and you can see here the program at the time of its original development. There's a 7-story commercial base that was originally occupied by 2 department stores, Bond and JCPenney. It also had 2 floors of offices in this base structure. That's topped by the 12-story setback hotel mass in the terrace. The terrace is what gave the hotel its name, the Terrace Plaza. The tall penthouse was occupied by what was formerly the Gourmet Room restaurant and mechanical space. It's designed with structural steel and brick curtain walls. And the street level is defined by storefronts. And you can see here a historic photo from around the time of its opening. When we look at the historic significance of the building, this property was previously recommended for designation by this board. No substantial changes to its historic integrity or its character defining features have occurred since that time in February of 2019. And what's before you today is a determination of historic significance based on the criteria in 1435-07-1A in the zoning code, which you can see here on the screen. A structure is determined to have historic significance if it meets one of the 4 attributes listed in the zoning code. Your determination that's before you today is really, does the property meet one of these 4 criteria? You make a recommendation based on these criteria to the City Planning Commission and City Council. The applicant has nominated the hotel under criterion 3, and that is that it embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, method of construction, or that represents a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. Staff concurs with this finding that the building is historically significant under criterion 3, as it embodies the distinctive defining elements of modernist architecture and the international style. You have a really extensive, over 60-page long designation report that was provided in advance. I'm not going to repeat all of that information here today, but I am going to highlight some of the most important firsts of the Terrace Plaza and its significance. It was America's first international style hotel. It was the first hotel designed by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, a firm that really helped to define the international style in the country. The lead designer of the Terrace Plaza was Natalie Dubois. In the 1940s, being a woman architect and being the lead designer on a building, particularly of the scale, was extremely rare. And she's really a pioneer in the field of architecture as a woman. The hotel had the first fully automated elevator system in the nation, the first dual heating system that would run on both gas and fuel oil or coal. The fire safety sprinkler systems were the most technologically advanced in the world at the time of construction. The rooms were the first to offer guests a television in every room. And they had the first user-controlled air conditioning systems in each room. So really a lot of first and unique features for this building in Cincinnati. I do think it's important to point out that modern architecture and the international style are not everyone's preferred aesthetics. And the determination that's before you today is not a determination as to whether you like the international style, whether you think that style is worthy of preservation or aesthetically pleasing, but it said this building embodies the distinctive characteristics of that style. And for that, it's historically significant. So I do feel it's staff's evaluation that the building does embody the distinctive characteristics of that style through its clean, simple design, rectilinear forms, geometric massing, and really limited applied ornament and decoration. In addition to the determination of historic significance, there are conservation guidelines before you today as well. The zoning code requires that the guidelines are adopted at the time of a building's designation. That's under 1435-07-2C. What is submitted to you by the applicant is what was previously submitted in 2019. It also incorporates all of the edits that staff worked with the applicant in the State Historic Preservation Office at that time in 2019. So the staff's finding is that the proposed guidelines are really a best practice approach, preserving the exterior of the structure and allowing reuse and redevelopment of the building. There is flexibility offered in some changes to the exterior for a garage entrance, signage, even potentially some more window openings, as long as they're in keeping with the overall character and design of the building. Overall, our staff finding is that the proposed guidelines are consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. So we're recommending adoption of the design guidelines as proposed. There has been a request from a potential purchaser to have time to work with SOM to study the design guidelines further and potentially propose changes or different design guidelines. So I do want to acknowledge there certainly could be other design guidelines that are in keeping with the historic preservation of the building, that are equally as appropriate and consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. But our recommendation is based on the guidelines that are before you today and finding that those are appropriate. There was a pre-hearing on March 17th. 14 people attended that meeting. 2 members of the applicant team spoke in favor of the designation. Doug Mormon, representing Berkla Investment Group, expressed concerns that the design guidelines are not compatible with the financially viable adaptive reuse. He noted they've informed the applicant of their efforts to engage SOM in the adaptive reuse project, and they requested the designation hearing be held for additional time to work on the design guidelines. The Cincinnati Preservation Association did not request to hold the designation, and so that's why it's before you today, proceeding on the typical application to review timeline. We received 10 letters of support and 2 letters of opposition in advance of the packets going to the board and being posted on the website. After the packets were prepared, 4 additional letters of support were received and 1 additional letter of opposition was received, and those have all been accepted into the record and provided to the board members as well. Staff finds that the proposed designation is consistent with Plan Cincinnati, particularly with the Sustain Initiative in Goal 2, preserving our built history. So in conclusion, as we get to staff's recommendation, what's before you is solely the historic designation and the decision of does what's proposed meet the historic significance criteria in 1435-071. No redevelopment proposal is part of this application. This is not a determination about whether redevelopment of the building is economically viable. It is the building historically significant? And any determination of economic hardship or viability could be brought forward if the building is designated as a future application. So we are recommending that the board take the following action. that you recommend to the City Planning Commission and City Council the designation of the entire tax parcels referred to as 15 West 6th Street and known as the Terrace Plaza Hotel as a historic landmark, and the adoption of the historic conservation guidelines, which were presented in your packets. We're recommending the condition that any construction proposed comply with the proposed historic conservation guidelines. We make this recommendation with the following findings. And those are that it's been demonstrated that the Terrace Plaza Hotel meets 1435-071A as the building maintains integrity and embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, method of construction, or that represent a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. That the Terrace Plaza Hotel is considered the most important modernist building in Cincinnati. That the Terrace Plaza Hotel has local and national significance for being the first international style hotel, one of the first hotels built after World War II, for its association with SOM, and its association with a pioneer and woman architect, Natalie Dubois. The Historic Conservation Board previously recommended approval of the historic landmark status, February 25th, 2019, and that the proposed Terrace Plaza Hotel historic conservation guidelines are compatible with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. So I'm happy to answer any questions from the board.
Thank you. Very quickly, before we go to the applicant, the applicant, Cincinnati Preservation Association, is not the current owner of the property. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. With that, we'll go to the applicant. And who is speaking on behalf of that? Is that Mr. Suter?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Sean Suter here, Suter LLC, on behalf of the applicant, the Cincinnati Preservation Association. It's my great honor to be here on behalf of the Cincinnati Preservation Association today to discuss what is arguably the most important mid-century modern building in this region, if not in this country, or one of them. With me today is Paul Muller, Executive Director of the Cincinnati Preservation Association. And also with me is Sean Tubbs, who is a board member of the Cincinnati Preservation Association and also wrote the book on the Terrace Plaza Hotel. So he'll have a lot to contribute. We appreciate your all's time today. I don't think there's any question in anyone's mind, or there shouldn't be, that this building has historic significance. It absolutely has historic significance under the criteria under 1435-07-1. And I don't think there's any dispute about that. I think the question is on the guidelines, and that's something that we have a strong position on, and Paul Muller will talk to you more about, along with Mr. Tubbs today, about why the guidelines that are written, we believe, are the most advantageous to the preservation of this building, meaning that they're going to give the best opportunity to achieve historic tax credits at the state and federal level, because they're most in line with Secretary of Interior standards and most in line with the strict standards of the State Historic Preservation Officer. We believe, coming to that these guidelines are compatible and appropriate to the history of this important building. Designation does a lot of things. The designation does not, as you might hear, guarantee that this building is not going to be redeveloped. That's not true. We have one opinion on that you might hear, but generally speaking, this building has a lot of interest from around the country and will have a lot of interest, especially if it's subject to and eligible for historic tax credits. All historic buildings have challenges. This one has its own unique challenges, but those unique challenges are also what makes it an incredibly unique and interesting, historically significant building. So with that, we believe designation will help save this building. We don't know who's going to own the building. I think it's important to note that the building's up for auction. It has been neglected over the years by an absentee out-of-town owner. The city's been fighting with that owner for some time. The building is going to auction. There are a lot of people looking at it, is my understanding, and so we don't know who's going to be owning that building. So designation keeps the control local. It keeps the control with the city, with the people of Cincinnati, and it ensures that this building will not be demolished. Registration on the National Register does not protect the building from demolition, but registration as a local landmark or designation as a local landmark does. And that leaves it up to this board to determine whether this building would ever be demolished. It also leaves the restoration of the building up to this board on how it is done in compliance with the guidelines. So very important to have local input on this, as it is one of Cincinnati's most important historic buildings. So thank you for your time today and your consideration with that. I'm going to turn it over to Paul Muller, Executive Director. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Muller.
Thank you. I'm Paul Muller, the Executive Director of Cincinnati Preservation Association, and I'm really happy to be here today on this one. You might have heard I'm leaving after 12 years as CPA, and to be able to present one of the most important buildings in Cincinnati to you for landmark designation, it's just a great way to end my encounters with you all here. The staff did an incredible job of presenting the significance of the building. I would like to add just a few things to that. And one is that it not only embodies the characteristics of modernism, it innovated them. It brought them forward in a way that shaped the course of architecture in America. The general design of a slab rising out of a plinth first appeared in the Terrace Plaza, and then Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, with Natalie Dubois working on it, did the Lever House in New York, which is a National Historic Landmark of a plinth with a slab. And then when the United Nations building was being designed, SOM wasn't doing the building, but they loaned Natalie Dubois to the team. And that's where that sort of prototype took full expression. If it's all right, I would like to share my screen with a very quick slide presentation. Is that okay to do?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, and it's short, I promise. Let me see here. There we go. And so I presume, are you seeing?
Yes.
The full screen, or are you seeing the, well, it doesn't matter which one you see. So, yeah, I do think I picked the wrong one. Let me screen share again. Which one is going to get me? Well, as long as you can see the slides, we're okay. Let me take you through a little bit of why the Terrace Plaza is considered by many people outside of Cincinnati and within Cincinnati such a historic icon. First of all, it came at this really particular time in American history when American industrial innovation had helped save the world for democracy. And Cincinnati played a very major role in that, from Pal Crosley's proximity fuses to Millicron's work to the entire GM war industry. Something happened at the end of the war. All of that innovation and industrial creativity turned its attention to the civic and social life of America. And the Terrace Plaza is the building that brought that moment in time, that transition from the wartime economy to a peacetime prosperity into focus for the entire country. When it opened in 1948, it was the first major building to come out of the post-war era, and it was seen as a harbinger of the future. When the governor came down for the opening, I might have the words slightly off, but Sean Tubb can probably correct me. I think he said something like, "I've seen the future in Cincinnati, and it is beautiful." This was a sort of a shocking combination of urban design, bringing together department stores, hotel, restaurant on the top that looked like a spaceship, everything about this building spoke of the prosperity that was coming in the future. And there was technology built into it. The beds slid in and out. Everything was designed comprehensively, from the uniforms that the people wore to the artwork. And it was a building that combined modern art into a modern building for the first time. And again, that artwork has been preserved by moving it to the Cincinnati Art Museum, the Murau, the Saul Steinberg, and the Calder are all there. There was other artwork too that did not make it to the terrace, to the museum. But it's not an insignificant part of the importance is Natalie Dubois' role in being the lead designer for Skidmore, Owens and Merrill. It was one of their first major buildings, helped launch their career. They're now one of the world's leading architectural firms. And she was in charge of this in her late 20s, which was really surprising. That's the Lever House that you're seeing on the side there. She never got to see the building when she was designing it, or never came when it was under construction. And Sean Tubb and CPA arranged to bring her here. Unfortunately, she got to view it before she passed away. And now she's considered one of the pioneers of modernism. She really wasn't recognized in her lifetime. And we're really grateful that we got to be part of a little bit of that recognition before she died. The New York Times gave her a very extensive obituary, and she's considered a pioneer of modern architecture. Previously, I'm sorry. And then Sean Patrick Tubb book on the Terrace Plaza is one of the things that first called attention to the importance of the Terrace Plaza. And I think it's one of the reasons that we went forward with the landmark designation with Vice Mayor Mann last time. People have asked for a pause right now. Well, there was a pause from 2019 to now. And actually, we've been working on this, and I was looking through my files since 2010. It's been a focus for us. The work that happened in 2010 attracted an award from Docomomo US. They're an organization that's worldwide that has a US branch that promotes the preservation of modernism. It was kind of fun to be there at the award ceremony because we were right there with the St. Louis's Arch, which was like $200 million restoration. And then it was us sort of promoting the Terrace Plaza. We're in pretty good company there. But Docomomo noted in their letter, and thank you for allowing that into the record, even though it came in after your deadline. They noted 3 successful early modernist hotels that have been restored. The PSFS building, which was a 1928 high-rise in Philadelphia, and then the Statler Hotel in Dallas, and then another one in Arizona. But there's an ability to make these special places, and several of those are related to convention center expansions. And I think we have that opportunity here. The biggest thing that happened, though, is the National Trust for Historic Preservation named the Terrace Plaza to their 11 most endangered list in 2020. And I think that should give you a lot of what you need to know about the significance of this building. It's really hard to get on the 11 most endangered list. I think the Grand Canyon was on it, Gettysburg Battlefield. There are a lot of historic places in the country, and to be one of the 11 most endangered is a really high level of recognition of the national importance of something. And then locally here, I think that helped people understand that even though the building is hard to imagine right now, and it's a difficult, it hasn't been cared for, and the importance of it sometimes is not obvious from looking at it. We created an exhibition on the history of the Terrace Plaza you can go to if you want to. It's linked on our website. But here's one of the reasons I really think it's important to keep the Terrace Plaza. Our historic buildings tell the story of Cincinnati, and they tell it in different time periods. So for the 1880s, Music Hall does a really good job of sort of summing up what was going on. Memorial Hall for the 1910s, Carew Tower for the 1920s, and we really hit it out of the park with all of these, but Union Terminal is one of the great Art Deco buildings in the world. Well, the Terrace Plaza represents Cincinnati's age of modernism, and not only for Cincinnati, but it was the nation's entry into that time period. So it really deserves the protections that historic landmark designation give it. And far from diminishing the development opportunities for it, it gives you, the Historic Conservation Board, the ability to make thoughtful decisions about how it can be revised. And we know it has to be, it will have to be adapted, like all of these buildings have been. But to leave it unprotected, I think would be a real dereliction of duty on our part at CPA and on the city's part. We agree that with this quote from your previous Historic Conservation Board ruling that the evidence is conclusive, that it meets the designations. And here I'll ask you if you would like this or not, but I have a 90-second clip by Gabriel Esperdy, who's a professor. It's really intense, and she packed a lot of information in. So would it be okay if I did a 90-second video clip by her?
Go ahead.
Okay.
The Terrace Plaza Hotel in Cincinnati is a significant building in the history of American architecture and the history of American culture. It represents not simply the acceptance, but the maturation of modernism in American architecture. And it also signals a kind of return to prosperity in American cities, in the peacetime economy following World War II, in which private developers were investing in what we could consider programmatically and spatially inventive buildings like the commercial composition of the Terrace Plaza. Finally, the building is significant because it represents a singular contribution by an American woman in U.S. architecture in the post-war period. Natalie Dubois' contributions to the work of Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, and hence to American architecture in the second half of the 20th century should not be discounted. The Terrace Plaza is an important building that deserves restoration, preservation, and inventive redevelopment.
Thank you for letting me run that. I'm finishing here. I just want to summarize by saying it meets the criteria of embodying the characteristics of a time. It has not been altered to the point where you could say the alterations undermine that, because 80 to 90% of the exterior is original, and that's what your zoning controls. The interior has been altered, although a lot of the sky lobby material, marble and stainless steel, is there. But I just want to make sure that we move away from the idea that this is an economic feasibility decision. That's not written into what you are to decide here. It is, does this building meet the criteria? And there's plenty of time later for going through economic feasibility in individual applications. But you should be in control of that, not just a developer who doesn't have to regard the historic fabric of the building in making those decisions. And the guidelines provide for a great deal of flexibility. For example, windows are not considered to be appropriate for the base if they are incompatible with the original design. And that will be a determination that you can make. So there could be a case for windows in the base that what you determine to be compatible with the original design. And finally, this represents Cincinnati's role in introducing the nation to modernism and in architecture and technology. We were celebrated for all of those things, and it's a legitimate part of our history because we played a role in the development of many of those. So anyway, I really hope you'll consider the designation. I will sign off on this and see that, turn it over to Sean Patrick. But again, as one of my last appearances before you, I'm just really proud that it's on the Terrace Plaza, which is one of Cincinnati's bright moments in introducing technology and the arts in an innovative way to the entire country. Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, Mr. Suter, who's next?
Mr. Sean Patrick Tubb is going to speak now on behalf of the Cincinnati Preservation Association. Mr. Tubb.
Hello, thank you for having me. So I'll try not to repeat too many of the things that others have said, probably better than I could. So I just wanted to start by saying that the Terrace Plaza is in a really important part of Cincinnati's cultural heritage, perhaps more than some of the other buildings that you've landmarked in the past, because it's important at the national level. It's already been recognized by the US government, the state of Ohio, the National Trust, Docomomo US, and many other organizations as being a critical part of our architectural history. And if listed, it would become the city's first modernist landmark, which would be a fitting tribute as the building is turning 75 years next year. Designed in the international style, the Terrace Plaza was a rational solution to the program for 2 department stores and a hotel. It filled the allowable zoning envelope with the retail in a 7-story base, and then stepped back the hotel slab asymmetrically to create the namesake terraces. Fortune magazine called that a design prototype of the mid-century hotel and a triumphant marriage of art and economics. The base was clad in a 4x12 terracotta colored brick in a stacked bond to accentuate the fact that it was non-structural. Floors 3 through 7 were without windows at the request of the department stores. The decision to use locally produced brick as the cladding was made jointly by the client, the architect, and the contractor, who all agreed that it was the best choice for purpose, economy, and color. According to Architectural Forum in 1946, the large size of the bricks was selected to give better scale and an attractively different appearance. The brick curtain wall serves as a bridge between the traditional masonry buildings of Cincinnati and the glass curtain walls, which were to come just a few years later at the United Nations Secretariat building. To place the Terrace Plaza in its context a little further, as the first high-rise commission for the architecture from SOM, it's helpful to remember that the other international landmarks, which are the Terrace Plaza's descendants, include Lever House and One World Trade Center in New York, John Hancock Center and Willis Tower in Chicago, the Jin Mao Tower in Shanghai, and the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. These are just a handful of SOM's towers, which happened after the Terrace Plaza. Lever House was just 3 years later, and Natalie Dubois also worked on that. This being her first project as senior designer at the age of 24, although she was largely unrecognized during her long and prolific career, Natalie Dubois is now seen as one of the most important architects in the development of the mid-century skyscraper. This Saturday would have been Natalie's 101st birthday, and what better celebration than to see the Terrace Plaza on its way to becoming a local landmark. And that's all I wanted to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Suter, who else?
That's it from the Cincinnati Preservation Association. We thank you again. Again, this is all about the designation criteria of historic significance. There are challenges, obviously, and the good thing is that if you designate it, we'll be all part of that conversation and seeing how we can get this building into productive use. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. All right, I have some other people signed up. Chip Gerhardt.
So he was here and dropped off. I'm gonna try to let someone in. I believe maybe him trying to re-sign in. Yeah, I believe that is Mr. Gerhardt there. Mr. Gerhardt, are you with us?
Mr. Gerhardt is not, but Mr. Mormon is. I apologize. We've had some type of issue where I've lost the video on my screen.
I believe Mr. Gerhardt has joined us, Mr. Mormon, and I'm asking him to unmute.
He's not able to unmute at this point in time.
Okay. All right.
All right, Mr. Mormon, you say you don't have a video connection?
For some reason, I have lost my video connection. I apologize for that. But I would like to proceed if that's acceptable to the chair.
Yes, please, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. My name is Doug Mormon, and I'm with Development Strategies Group here in Cincinnati. We are representing representing Berkla Investment Group. We're here to speak as an interested party on this particular application. I think, as many of you are well aware, Berkla Investment Group has a longstanding interest in this property. They were in the midst of trying to purchase this building 5 or 6 years ago. There was some activity that occurred that has resulted in federal litigation that has been ongoing for some time as it relates to Mr. Berkla and the immediate past owner of the building. And there's also, as I think everyone is aware, bankruptcy litigation that is going on right now. But to the best of our knowledge, Berkla Investment Group is the only developer that has expressed an interest in acquiring this property in the last number of years. And I think the city staff, at least in the economic development department, is well aware of that. We have taken some time to review the guidelines that are proposed. And as I shared in the letter that's part of your packet, we do not believe that those guidelines are compatible with an adaptive reuse for the building. Mr. Berkla has reached out to Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, SOM, the architecture firm that designed this building originally. And we are working with them to reach an agreement that would designate them as the principal architect for the adaptive reuse of this building. And our interest is making the hotel tower, converting that into apartments. We are looking at the 7-story brick structure, potentially as a parking structure for either 5 or 7 levels. And we're in the midst of beginning an office market study to see if potentially there could be 2 floors of that reserved for office, which would result in just 5 stories being used for parking. With the success of the Foundry next door being leased up for office, we do think there's a viable market for that, but there's more research that needs to be done on that particular topic. But we do see this as an adaptive reuse of the building. As was stated earlier, we did reach out to the Cincinnati Preservation Association and ask them to hold this application while our colleagues at SOM would have the opportunity to craft some guidelines that would both recognize the historic nature of the building while also incorporating some flexibility that would permit an adaptive reuse of the building. We had hoped to find what we would consider a compromise or some win-win situation. But I guess our best estimate is based on the fact that this hearing is proceeding today, that the Cincinnati Preservation Association has decided otherwise and is not interested in engaging in that conversation with us, which turns our attention to the application itself. Our belief is this application that's pending before you does not reflect the current condition of the building. I'd refer you to the pictures that we accompanied our letter. I think it's fair to characterize the interior of the building as an unmitigated disaster. It is in a terrible state of disrepair. The building certainly did have tremendous attributes when it was open during its useful life. But most of those things, if not all of those things, are gone. The building has been stripped of nearly everything that's interior to it, to the point where the heating for the building is not through ductwork, but it's through stairwells. So it's just in a poor state of disrepair. I'd just like to reiterate that we have been monitoring this particular piece of property for years. We continue to be in close contact with the city economic development staff about this. We have not identified any other interested developers that have come forward. The building actually is available for sale right now at the conclusion of this bankruptcy process. And our understanding still is that no other interested purchasers have come forward. Our deep concern is that if this building is designated as historic by the city, it will handcuff a developer's ability to redevelop the property in any way that is financially viable. And if that becomes the case, which we believe it will, this building, which has city nuisance findings against it, and by all appearances is on the road to condemnation, is going to result in a situation where the only value that's left in this property is the land. So our belief is that in not designating this building, you would provide a developer, Berkla, or perhaps anyone else, the opportunity to try and actually save the structure, and the building itself would not be lost. We believe that designation, again, would handcuff developers to the point where that's no longer financially possible. So, we would leave you with the idea that we believe that we have an opportunity to save the building itself, as opposed to going down the path of designation, which would result in potentially saving the concept of the building, but the structure itself would cease to exist. I would just add that we have shared this with the city. We've shared this also with the Preservation Association, but Mr. Berkla's plans do call for bringing back the gourmet room. He and his organization are successful restaurateurs. They have redeveloped the 580 building downtown and own a few of the restaurants that are in the 580 building that have continued to be successful, even in spite of COVID. We've also committed to paying homage to the history and the architect of this building, whether that be in a specific one exhibit or a series of exhibits that would recognize the architect, the history, and the attributes of this building in a way that honors its past. We recognize that it's on the National Register of Historic Places. We do think that that's certainly an important designation that has already occurred, but our concern is really in saving the structure of the property itself. And with that, I would say that we appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today and would ask for your consideration of our position. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mormon, I have a quick question for you. What is it about a local designation that you envision would make it financially unfeasible to do whatever it is you have in mind to do?
Well, our belief is that there are issues with a variety of the aspects of the designation. We are very concerned about the 7-story brick facade, its structural integrity as it stands right now. We're also concerned about the marketability of the building. When you look around at other properties where there have been successful reuses, those require a fresh look. And we're concerned that the guidelines would prevent us from making some changes to the facade that may freshen it up and make it a marketable product, and even making some changes that might be required because of the structural nature of the brick. The brick is in a structure, and I recognize that what some of our colleagues from the Historic Preservation Association have noted is in a unique format. But what the engineers tell us is that is not the most structurally supportive approach to laying brick. And there are serious concerns about that. And beyond that, we are concerned about windows, not just in the 7-story brick facade, but really as you move up into the, up into the hotel tower, which would become apartments. The windows, as you can see in the photographs that have been provided for you, are what you would consider hotel windows. There's a wall, a window, and a wall. Patrons of downtown apartment buildings, of all apartment buildings, look for a lot of natural light. And we believe that there's going to need to be alterations to those windows, probably of the, larger windows, potentially even floor to ceiling windows that would be necessary in order to be in a position to have rentable units that get the type of natural light that apartment dwellers are looking for. So there are particular aspects like that we find concerning that would, in our judgment, prevent us from making the changes that are necessary to produce a product that is, quite frankly, bankable, a product that you can take to a bank, that it is a financeable project. If we go to the bank and say, we need the first X number of $1 million to stabilize the external brick structure, that's not an investment that a bank is going to see as having a return on that investment. So it's really something we view as being financially necessary to have the flexibility to make some of these alterations in order to have a product that is both marketable as well as one that is an investment grade product.
Thank you. All right, we have one other person that I have checked in, Artdahlberg, Director of Buildings and Inspections.
Good afternoon, this is Artdahlberg. I don't have any prepared remarks. I just am attending, so in case there were some questions on the enforcement strategies that have taken place up to this point, we can provide that information.
I appreciate that. Are there current orders on the building?
Yes, there are.
Can you give us a quick rundown of what those entail?
They've dealt with a number of different issues, from the cooling tower that is on the, if I get this right, the west end of the building. There was some skin on that flew off in a windstorm a number of years ago and unfortunately dropped into an occupied vehicle. But also the remaining structure is, while we believe isn't in imminent danger of coming on off, it is something that needs to be dealt with. The roof is in a condition that it needs to be totally replaced. So there's orders relating to that. Overall, water intrusion issues into the building, fire system issues related to the building, and permanent heat's going to need to be provide to the building. As one speaker mentioned, currently they're using the stairwell as a shaft to be putting heat up so that the standpipes don't freeze. That's really sums it on up for you.
Thank you. All right. That's everybody I have signed up, unless Mr. Suter or Cassandra have somebody else that's signed in.
May I speak for just a second, Mr. Voss?
You may.
Okay, on behalf of Cincinnati Preservation, in response to some of the comments we heard, I think we're at a really dangerous place here with this building. The building is at risk because this is the first time in any number of years that there's an imminent transfer going to happen because of the auction that's upcoming. And the reality is we don't know who is going to own this building. It might be Anderson Berkla. And we appreciate their pledge here today that they will not demolish this building if they do purchase it. But we don't know if they're going to own it. So to make a decision on designation based on one person's potential interest in the property is not proper, not wise, I don't think. They also indicate through Mr. Mormon that they're going to be making significant wholesale changes to the building, or seeking those if they get a hold of it. That's why they don't want the designation. Essentially, you're hearing that they're going to be taking off the brick skin from the first 7 floors. First we've heard of any kind of structural issues. And they also are now talking about the windows on the upper floors of the building. And so we anticipate that if this building is not designated, that no one here or in the city will have any say in how they go about making these alterations. It's going to significantly change this building. It may become more bankable, but it's going to be a loss to the integrity of this building and the historic significance of it. So I would ask you not to make a decision based on one potential owner's whims, but to make a determination based on all of the support for the designation that you have received, and to do it quickly so that we can get out ahead of this potential sale that's upcoming before someone gets on their hands on it and makes a demolition permit application. So appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. That is everybody we have signed up. Questions, comments from the board? Don't all speak at once.
All right, it's Pam. I don't think we can lose this building. And at the beginning of the presentation, I was happy when, and I can't remember who mentioned it, the idea of let's get beyond money. This is This is one of the landmarks in the city that needs to be preserved. And then also the idea that a woman was the lead architect in the 40s, that's huge. And we need to know that. And we need to know that in being able to look at that building. So we need to keep it.
Thank you.
I think it's clear in my mind that this building meets the requirements to be designated as a local landmark based on the history and the unique features. I think, as was mentioned previously, the thing in my mind that's really up to debate today is, are the guidelines that are proposed the appropriate guidelines for this building at this time? And I think that from my perspective, the guidelines are consistent with preserving the elements of the building that are unique and important to its history. I do think that, once a proposal for reuse of this building is put into place, this board, as often is the case, has some latitude on guidelines and how they're interpreted. And I think that is the appropriate time for that debate, not just wholesale throwing out preservation of some of the specific features of this building now ahead of that point when we have a proposal in front of us to consider.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Suter. Mr. Suter, 3 years ago, this committee passed this resolution that you're asking for, and you did nothing about it, or nothing came of it, I guess I should say. And I'm wondering why that is.
Thank you, Member Sunderman. I probably defer to Paul Muller on that because I wasn't involved in 2019, so I don't have any knowledge personally on that. But Mr. Muller, do you?
Yeah, that was Councilman Mann's landmark designation at the time. And I am not clear why he did not take it to the City Planning Commission back then.
I guess I understand the argument that this building, if you take a look at the criteria, could it meet one of the elements or one of the various categories? And I would say, yeah, it probably does. I would say though, since the owner of this building does not want the historic designation, that we would be forcing or it's possible that a historic designation could be forced on him. And two, given the disrepair, et cetera, of this building, I don't know right now is the time to limit what someone might want to do with it. Would that historic designation almost, well, obviously it would have some effect in what could be done, but I'm a little concerned that it would be prohibitive for someone to come in and do something about it. That building has been sitting there for 20 years with very little occupancy. It's a half a block of the major block of downtown Cincinnati. And I don't think we need a statue.
Mr. Chair, my thoughts on this, I agree with Ms. McKenzie in that, the board has some discretion to make modifications as we move forward. And I think with the auction coming up, what we do today does not preclude changes in either the standard that we're proposing, which I don't feel is all that onerous. And I am a little bit familiar with the building, having worked with a firm that was involved in and off on it for a number of years. And actually, this was one of the first buildings that I visited as a child when I moved to Cincinnati, and I had an opportunity to actually eat in the restaurant. Back then, I thought that was pretty cool. But it is such a unique treasure, and I understand the problems with having windowless floors and That is problematic to every, I've worked for developers my entire life. I get it. But on the other hand, I don't think what we do today precludes possibilities that if SOM and Berkeley come up with a plan that makes sense to everybody, I think the board would be more than happy to pursue that, take it into consideration. But in the interim, I just feel like we don't really know who the owner is yet. I think this would probably be a good time to at least put our stamp on it.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? All right. I'm of two minds here. I think that we have a building that clearly meets the criteria. I do have some significant reservation about putting a designation which may do more to hinder redevelopment, and absent that, it will come down through neglect. My take on it is that if we are to recommend to the Planning Commission and Council in the affirmative, and that is followed through on, we may be asked to do some significant bending to try to make this an economically viable development. That having been said, I think, I'm ultimately coming down on the side of, yes, it is a significant building. Yes, the architect in question is noteworthy. And as long as the board is prepared to look with a eye to economics when somebody finds a potential solution, then I think I come down on recommending in the affirmative. So that's my take on it. Does anybody else have questions or comments? I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll move that the board recommends to the Cincinnati Planning Commission and to City Council to create the designation for the Terrace Plaza Hotel and approve the guidelines that are being proposed per staff's recommendations.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Mr. Sunderman,
No.
Mr. Zelasco,
Aye.
Ms. McKenzie,
Aye.
Mr. Weiss,
Aye.
Ms. Dobbins.
Yes.
As I say, I have grave misgivings, but I think we'll deal with the future. And if we're going to try to save this is the time to do it. I will vote aye. And so we will send our recommendations to the Planning Commission and Council. All right, that closes out item number 2. We do have February staff approvals. I haven't seen anything there that I had questions on. Does anybody else have questions on February staff approvals? All right, then I will move that we approve the staff approvals as given to us.
Second.
Mr. Sunderman,
Aye.
Mr. Zelasco,
Aye.
Ms. McKenzie,
Aye.
Mr. Weiss,
Aye.
Ms. Dobbins. Chair votes aye. All right, do we have any other business? All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.